Namaste. Welcome to this session. We were considering the Chitta Prasadana with a pranic and shwasic process. The pranayam and shwasayam significantly contribute for the mind to be relaxed, quietened, washed, cleansed, purified, sublimated, ennobled, and sanctified. So the sutra is Pracchardana vidharana va pranasya. And in previous session we were trying to understand how the exhalative act can work with respect to Chitta Prasadanam. So this is a measure which is available in Shwasayam and Pranayam. That is the process of breath regulating technique and prana regulating technique. Of course, it is obvious that to be handling this, you can't just exhale and get this done. You must be familiar with the processes of Shwasayam and Pranayam. You must be familiar with this process of Shwasayam and Pranayam. So it needs some kind of orientation. And when you have sufficient proficiency in Shwasayamic and Pranayamic aspects, then you can certainly handle. So therefore it needs some formal education with regards to Shwasayam and Pranayam. Basically, the chitta and breath, the mind stuff and the breath, the consciousness and the breath, they have a very close relationship. As a matter of fact, they are two sides of the same coin. And science of yoga has this postulation that breath and mind are two sides of the same coin. With that in mind, Patanjali says, Pracchardana vidharana va pranasya. So we had seen the meaning of the sutra. The prana means exhalation here. Prana kriya means exhalation. And then adharana means, in simple terms, a retention or suspension. So that also does Chitta Prasadanam. And I was telling you in the last session that you must try in all the various asanas the exhalation with reference to body matter, the mind matter and senses, and then experience. In various asanas you are given different access, and then you can experience and understand the relationship between exhalation and our embodiment, from body matter to consciousness matter. And by that, Patanjali says the chitta becomes prasadita. Prasadita means shanta, saumya, prasanna, swastha. Shanta means pacified, tranquil, quietened. Saumya means becoming tender, gentle. Prasanna means having a state of blessedness. And then swastha, it becomes, they become in to have a condition whereby they rest within themselves. The body, mind, senses find a rest within themselves. Usually we have to depend upon external factors for us to become relaxed. And that's why we encourage recreations. We want to take recourse to recreations and entertainments. By that, the body, mind, senses relax by abiding within themselves. But here, the external resources are used, whereas here in yoga, internal resources are used. The body by itself rests in itself. The mind by itself rests in itself. The senses by themselves rest in themselves. That is swastha. They remain, they abide into their own states. Now, if you have observed in our mechanical breathing, the in breath immediately follows the exhalation, and exhalation immediately follows the inhalation. So this happens successively. In breath and out breath happen successively. It is yoga which tells us about a loop between exhalation and inhalation and inhalation and exhalation. And that is a very strategic phase. Exhalation rolling over to inhalation and inhalation rolling over to exhalation. So there can be rollover, there can be slow down of the process, or there can be a suspension even, or there can be retention. Usually we common man only thinks of in breath, or maybe sometimes just out breath. But in yoga, the intervening period or the rollover is given importance. And that can be slowed down, or that can be given a slight suspension, slight pause, or there can be a retention. And all of you know that the retention means the kumbhaka. That is holding the breath. So breath might be held after exhalation, the breath might be held after inhalation. Or the breath might smoothly roll over from exhalation to inhalation and smoothly roll over from inhalation to exhalation. Or there can be a suspension for a while, a suspended phase for a while. And that is also called laya. That has potentials for laya. Even the termination of one for the other with respect to in breath and out breath and in breath, that has certain potentials, and common man doesn't really consider that. In yoga it is considered because yoga speaks of retention as a aspect of breathing. So there will be two retention, one is post-exhalative and the other one is post-inhalative. And this has great importance in yoga. It has great potentials as well. And common man really neglects and overlooks this. Just one example I can give you, that when you have to have extraordinary endeavor, physical endeavor, see how we use the post-exhalative phase and retentive phase. So that gives power, energy and strength. And this happens quite mechanically. Everyone is aware of this. Everyone uses this. the retentive phase. And yoga speaks about that as kumbhaka. There is bhya kumbhaka, antara kumbhaka. Bhya kumbhaka means after exhalative, and antar kumbhaka means after inhalative. And so these four aspects together actually become components of pranayam. So puraka, rechaka, these two things are well known. Then puraka, kumbhaka, rechaka, kumbhaka. So these become four. So actually these four things together are also considered in denotation of pranayam. And yogi uses these in an exalted way. Common man doesn't use this. Common man will use involuntarily. And there are so many endeavors. Even and these are quite natural processes. When you are in your toilet and you want to pass motions, we use the exhalative and post-exhalative phase in a very pronounced way. So also in the process of urination, we use the post-exhalative retentive phase. You want to open out a bottle which is tightly closed, we use the post-exhalative phase, the retentive phase. So there are so many places where we use the retentive phases quite organically, quite spontaneously, quite naturally. It doesn't need any training. Or when there are natural acts of sneezing and coughing, etc. A strong cough and then sneeze. So these things can be seen playing some role. The point is here, in yoga, and here Patanjali is speaking about their role for Cittaprasadanam, as to how the mind would be cosmicalized, pacified, quietened, etc., etc. So, as I said during the last session, this doesn't need much explanation, but this needs a lot of exploration. And I told you during the last session, you should try out this, understand the unique characteristics and features and bounties of in-breath and out-breath in your asanas, various asanas, profound inhalations, profound exhalations in various asanas, the post-exhalative suspension and retention post-asanas. And here particularly, Patanjali is mentioning about exhalation, which is characterized as exhalative breath vomit. Pracchardana is the word that he has used. That means the exhalation is almost a vomit kind of exhalation. It comes with that gush and force. And then Vyasa describes this, that the breath from abdominal cavity is ejected strongly through the nasal gates, and with a particular and voluntary effort. There's a voluntary and particular effort with which the breath is coming from abdominal cavities forcefully to be let out through the nasal passages. And then a short retention or suspension, which is called vidha, which is a kind of pranasthambanam. And that also works to quieten the mind and quieten the chitta at large. And that is called Cittaprasadanam. So, Vyasa clearly mentions that it is a kind of pranayam. Pranayam Vishesha prayatna. It's an effort which is by adhering some pranayamic techniques. So that he has made it clear. So now if you compare this with the first measure of chitta prasadanam, which was a kind of endeavor to culture the very psyche, and the second one is taking recourse to breath. The first one is a mental endeavor, maitri bhav, karuna bhav, mudita bhav, upeksha bhav. So something that has to be done on the plane of mind. And the second measure is something that has to be done on the plane of breath. So that is also to be taken note of. Then he says, Pracchardana vidharanabhyam va pranasya. The letter va literally is to suggest an alternative, vikalpa, or it is vikalparthaka, or it is suggesting an alternative. But Tattva Vaisharadi of Vachaspati Mishra makes it clear that it is not literally alternative suggested here. So he says, Va Shabdo Vakshamanopayantara Apeksho Vikalpartha Na Maitriadi Bhavanapekshaya Tasya Sahasamuchayat. So, samuchaya means combination of the two. This is the meaning here. The va comes to tell us that it can be not or in the sense alternative as it literally means, but also samuchaya, the combination. So we have to use both these means, measures. And some of the interpreters, such as Vijnana Bhikshu, he has taken this to be a process of pranayam itself. He says it is pranayama, but Vyasa says pranayama vishesha. So this has been taken as Puraka Rechaka Kumbhaka. But that is not very apt. Some of them have brought even Nadi Shodhan etc. pranayamas while commenting on this sutra. Like Bhava Ganesh. Bhava Ganesh has brought various pranayamas here, Nadi Shodhan etc. pranayamas. So he says this is the pranayamic measure, one should take recourse to pranayam and actualize this. It is simply because prachvasa is pranayam. Shwasa prachvasa means in breath and out breath. And here the reference is to prana kriya means uchvasa prashvasa. So that is why the pranayam has been brought in here in focus. Basically, one should know that here, in short and in brief, to conclude, the exhalation is closely related with the nervous system, and all that is dependent on nervous system. And then you can understand how our total physical body is related, dependent, controlled, regulated by nervous system. Even the mind is regulated by nervous system. So exhalation has a greater function on the whole nervous system and all the systems which are very strongly based on nervous system. Then with reference to Rajatama Gunas, which formulate dirt in our embodiment and dirt in our mind. So all the dirt in our mind is of the nature of Rajatama Gunas, and therefore the exhalation also works on Rajatama Gunas, and therefore the mind is purified, and purified to sanctified. The asmita is also seen undergoing a kind of rarification. The exhalation, if you relate it to your very pronoun I, you can see that it works to deflate our ahankara. It also washes the ahankara, cleans the ahankara, and diminishes the ahankara. So also it works on our vasanas. There is a wonderful verse that comes in Yoga Vasishtya which relates exhalation to vasana. And it says that exhalation works for vasana dabanam, vasana kshaya. So also kleshas and shatripus, all defects of the mind, the anger also would go down by exhalation. Abnormal conditions of mind which are negative, they also go down by exhalation. The Shadripu balloon is also deflated. So therefore exhalation has enormous efficacy, which again I say is matter to experience more than theorize it and then explain it. So anyway, Patanjali has brought this second measure, which is related to breath. Then Patanjali proceeds to third measure, which is with reference to senses. So we have seen a measure with reference to mind, which is Maitri Karuna Mudita Upeksha Bhavana. The second one, Pracchardana Vidharana va Pranasya, with reference to breath. Now the third measure comes with reference to senses. So it is a kind of pratyaharik process in the third measure. See, the senses are not merely cognitive senses. The senses are gates of pain and pleasure. Our pain and pleasure primarily comes through senses. Not only pains and pleasures, but also pain, pleasure, delusion, sukha, dukkha, moha. So the senses are gates for sukha, dukkha, moha to find an entry into our chitta. So the senses have conditions such as active condition of the senses, the passive condition of the senses, and also neutral condition of the senses. The senses can also be in a neutral state, indifferent state, what is called as madhyastha, audasinya, or sublimation. The senses also have some potentials to sublimate the mind. We just now saw that the senses can delight the mind and sorrow the mind and delude the mind. But when you are leading a life with a philosophical touch, and when the yogic principles are coming in, the senses can be gates for your neutrality of the mind. The senses can be gates for sublimation of the mind. Senses can be gates for ennoblement of the mind. And the yoga technology comes very handy here. The common man is not used to using the senses that way. The senses work with their own tendencies, their own mechanism. But in yoga, there is one limb dedicated to senses called pratyahar. And therefore, again, it needs some formal training and education with reference to sensory aspects in asana, pranayam, and life. So that would help one actualize the unique potentials in the senses apart from pain, pleasure, delusion generators to sublimity, tranquility, neutrality, virginity, purity, piety, sanctity, sanity generators. And this is mentioning that. So we know the senses as jnanendriyas, but yoga, its technology makes them tatasthendriya, madhyasthendriya, and sakshiendriya. So senses are even given education through yoga to be tatasthendriya, that is to be indifferent. Because that which is going to create turmoil to your mind, if you are taking recourse to this potential, tatasthya, tatasthata, if the senses are given education to be neutral, then they really contribute mightily for you to be neutral and therefore not being afflicted by the torment. Or madhyasthendriya, they also can be madhyastha. They will be non polarized, and that is, they will be in a neutral state. Or they can be witness, they can be having witnessive role. They will help your mind to be witnessive. And the witnessive condition also creates a condition whereby your mind is proof to agitation, irritation, exasperation, worry, anxiety, tension, etc., stress, etc. So, now, therefore, Patanjali, when he mentions the third measure, uh, before going to see what Patanjali is telling us here, we should know that basically the senses have vaishayika pravrutti. That means the senses have enormous gravity to go after objects. So we know the relationship between the senses and sensuality. We know the relationship between the senses and their objects. There is like capillary attraction or gravity. The senses have a kind of magnetism of objects. They are quickly drawn to their objects, which are in the form of shabda, sparsha, rupa, rasa, gandha. Shabda means the object of sound, sparsha means object of touch, rupa means object of form, vision, and rasa means object of taste, and gandha means object of odor, fragrance, smell, etc. So the senses are open to these sensations. Our five sense organs are open to these objects, which are of five kinds, and they have a gravity towards their objects, and objects exercise a lot of gravity on the five senses. And that's why there is a vaishayikata in the senses. That means they are vulnerable to the radiations coming from objects. But yoga, and Patanjali particularly, is speaking about not Vaishayika Vritti but Vishayavati Vritti. Very, very fascinating terminology that has been introduced in this sutra, which is the third Cittaprasadana measure. So he speaks about Vishayavati Pravrutti. And again, more than postulating theory, etc., this is again a place where one should have some experience which comes in formal education in yoga. If you are formally trained in yoga, then definitely senses are considered. Because you see, chitta vritti nirodha and senses are so closely connected. It is the senses which are great obstacles for chitta vritti nirodha. And therefore, sensory reformation, the sensological techniques are offered by technology of yoga. And therefore, again, this is a matter of experience. We need to carry out so many experimentations with regards to the sensory usages and applications. We should not be using senses like a layman, common man uses. In yoga, we are given some formal education about how the senses must meet their respective objects. There are ways that you can really have some governance as to how the senses must meet their respective objects. And again, there are invaluable experiments which have to be carried out and which are taught to be carried out in process of yoga, which can be called as sensological acts. And they are very important aspects. And yoga has a formal training with regards to that. With Vaishyaikata, we get sensory pleasures and sometimes sensory pains as well, because the objects can give either pain or pleasure. One and the same object can be giving pain to somebody and pleasure to somebody else. So, they are used to pain, pleasure picks. They pick up pain and pleasure from object, and pain, pleasure, delusion from object. And these are that's the very natural process of the senses. But yoga has something what is called as damana kriya, damanam, damana kriya. And in various asanas, we must try out the contribution of senses. We have to set their profiles. You can set the profiles of the senses, then they will act in different ways. Different profiles, they will work in different ways. And that therefore, the passage which leads from senses to mind can be variegated, and we can opt for suitable passage rather than becoming prey of unsuitable passage, which is prone to happen for those who are not introduced to yoga technology. Anyway, Vishayavati pravritti means to channelize. We set a channel to relate senses with the objects in a typical way, specific way. So also, therefore, the senses and the mind, rather than usual process. See, if there is an object in front of your eyes, you will sight it, and then it will give you cognition, perception and cognition and vritti. So that's a natural process. Natural in the sense, it is under influence of your tendencies. But then you have a tuner. You have a tuner and fine tuner how to relate the senses to objects. So set the profile of the senses so that they work suitably with that object despite the contact with the object. And then also work on that channel, that passage which relates the senses to the mind. So understand there are two passages, the senses and object. So there is a passage. And then senses and mind, there is a passage. Now, commoners are not able to change the passages. But in yoga technology, you are taught to change the passages. See, those who are familiar with particular city, their native city. So they know how to go to a place which is a comfortable road, which is less traffic road, which is a shortcut and which is a easy cut. And they know which is a long cut or which is a route which makes us face traffic hassles. So the one who is not familiar with the city perhaps will know only one way how to go to a destination. But those who are well versed, suppose they are going and they find that there is a traffic jam or some problem, they will be able to take another route to go to same destination. Whereas a newcomer is not having this benefit. He knows only one way to go to destination. In case there is a problem, he goes through the problem, suffers the problem and reaches the destination. Whereas one who is well versed, used to that city and familiar with the city, he knows how to take a bypass, how to take another route. Sometimes the longer route is a shorter route because of the traffic jam on distance-wise a short route. It might be distance-wise short route, but because of congestion, it would take longer time to reach that destination. So maybe there is a longer route, but then it becomes shorter route, not in sense of distance, but in sense of time. So those who are well versed with particular city, familiar with particular city, their native city, they have many ways to go to one destination. So also there are many passages between senses and their objects, and not just one passage. And there are many passages to between senses and the mind, and not just one passage. The common man has only one passage, and therefore common man is vulnerable to face the consequences. So this Vishayavati Pravrutti means it is a way whereby you take a bypass to any sufferance, agony, worry, problem, difficulties, etc., etc. Because he knows many channels, he doesn't use the usual channel, which is physical distance, less physical distance, etc., or habitual channel. So the point is there are many channels between senses and their objects on one hand, and senses and their mind on the other hand. And Vishayavati Pravrutti is a channel whereby whatever may be the object, it will give you sublime experience, noble experience, quietening experience on one hand. If that is not possible, less problematic experience, less vexing experience, less troublesome experience, or no trouble experience, no vexation experience. So many paths are available. And that Vishayavati means it is such a passage, such a channel, which will neutralize any difficulties, hassles, problems, anxieties, worries, troubles, vexations. It will either lessen or it will totally give a turnaround. It will become quietening, ennobling, pacifying. So that is what the technology of yoga tells us about. And that is called Vishayavati Pravrutti rather than Vaishayika Pravrutti. And of course, it cannot be translated into English, and usually it is rendered as higher sensory activity. It is not only higher, it is superior. So it is superior sensory activity. As a common man, you don't have any gadgets to modify sensory activity. It is quite natural, and there are no choices. But there is a higher sensory activity, superior sensory activity, of which yoga speaks about, and that is Vishayavati Pravrutti. So Patanjali is going to introduce us to something like that. Vishayavati va pravrutir utpanna manasaha sthiti nibandhani. Vishayavati pravrutti. This is going to give you manasaha sthiti nibandhani. It will give you quiet condition to mind, serene condition to mind, placid condition to mind, passive condition to mind. So this is the next alternative measure. Alternative in the sense already explained. So Vishayavati Pravrutirva Manasaha Sthiti Nibandhani. So it's a very interesting topic where the sensory process, sensory mechanism is not mechanically used, but there are some regulators, there are some knobs and adjusters, so that we relate the senses to their objects in a unique way, whereby they will be quietening the mind, at least avoid any disquietening of the mind, which is quite natural because of the object. Like object of your hate. When the object of your hate is in front of your eyes, it's always going to give you vexation, torment. But there is a way. By this adjustment and by this tuning, although the senses have that object of their hate, they won't be tormented. If not, they are not given placid condition. But at least there will not be a torment. See, otherwise we are vulnerable to this. Object of your dislike is invariably going to give you a problem. Or the object which is deluding, which is enticing, is going to hook you in delusion. But here is a process that you will not be getting hooked in delusion, although it is a delusive object. Because some objects are delusive, some objects are pleasure giving, some objects are pain giving, and hardly anything can be done there. But in Vishayavati Pravrutti, or the technology which is with regards to senses, can help you not become victims of pains or sorrows or delusion. So again, as I said with regards to earlier measure, breath measure, here too we need to have some experimentations, and yoga opens out the field and gives you a laboratory so that you can learn the sensory usages. You will get some sensory modulators, a panel to modulate, tune, fine tune, adjust the interactions. At this point in time, let me tell you, the senses are, as a matter of fact, pillars of knowledge. That's why they are called Jnanendriya and cognitive organs. They are called cognitive organs. That means they are pillars for knowledge. But we very well know that they become caterpillars of the world. This is human experience. The senses hardly make sense, but most often, nonsense. There is no point in calling senses as sense, because most of the nonsense is encouraged, generated by senses. So senses hardly make sense, But more often, most of nonsense is by senses. This is again a strange condition that every human being faces. The senses are less sense but more nonsense. Therefore, we need to take some cultural acts, sensory cultural acts, the culturing, the path between senses and mind, and the path between senses and their objects. That is how to see an object. Like cameras, the cameras, when a professional is using it, he thinks about the focal distance, he selects proper lenses, or he uses some filters. So therefore, a professional photographer is a professional photographer because his camera has so many things. He can change the lenses also. We are not able to change our lenses of the eyes for different acts. So our eyes as cameras are amateur cameras where you can't be doing anything. With a given condition, you can only click a photograph and take a photograph, that's all. But the professional photographers, their cameras are unique and they have so many kind of accessories, they have so many adjustments whereby they would give you a professional photograph which will be totally different than a photograph given by an amateur with an amateur camera. So there are professional cameras and there are professional photographers. We common people, if we treat our eyes as cameras, we are amateurs. Our cameras are amateurs. They will be just catching the objects as they are. So, with regards to eyes, yoga makes us something like professional photographers, where they are selective about their cameras, they are selective about the films in the camera, they are selective about the senses as lenses and accessories to camera. Similarly, in yoga, we are given this technology to other senses as well. So your ears will become high-tech sound machines rather than amateur sound machines. So also with regards to other senses, olfactory organ, tactile organ, gustatory organ, all these senses are given a professional kind of skills and professional technology, and therefore the sensory inputs will be totally different. And therefore yogis in yoga, they will select proper condition of the sound machine of the ears, the smell machine of the nose, the taste machine of the tongue, the touch machine of the senses, and the visual machine of the eyes. And therefore the perceptions will be totally different. So that is what is the next measure. So we will look into this measure in the next session with little more information about it. Today we just had an introduction to it. So with that, we will end the session here. And in next session, we will consider again the same option of chitta prasadanam. Vishayavati va pravrutirutpannaha manasaha sthiti nibandhani. So namaskar all of you.